Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our conversation in recognition of Black History Month. In our virtual environment, I welcome everyone watching on YouTube Live, and it'll be a great hour, and I know it's going to go by quickly, so I want to get right into it. I'm State Controller Tom DeNapoli, and I'm really pleased to be joined by two incredible leaders. And I'm going to introduce them more appropriately in a couple of moments, but I really want to thank at the outset Jennifer Jones-Austin and Savante Myrick for joining me for this conversation this afternoon. So let me just mention a few things about the work that we're doing, and then we'll get to our guests. I think many of you know, each year we celebrate Black history, and we do that in the context of remembering the leaders and the trailblazers of the past, from the searing honesty and eloquence of Langston Hughes to the courage of women like Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, to the power and wisdom of Frederick Douglass, to the tenacity of A. Philip Randolph and Medgar Evers, to the unflinching resolve of Shirley Chisholm, to the towering moral leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King, and to the accomplishments of so many other groundbreaking and impactful Black leaders. Obviously, I've only mentioned just a few, so I'm sure some of you are saying, wait a minute, you didn't mention this one person or that person, but the whole hour would be spent on that list if I tried to get through every name. As important as it is during Black History Month to recognize individuals who have helped blaze a trail to economic and social progress across American society, I think it's also a time to take stock of the distance we still have to travel in America's journey to racial justice. And certainly with our guests, we're going to be talking about that as part of our conversation. Dr. King once said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So in this year of 2022, our nation continues to confront racial injustice in so many different spheres of our society. If we are going to continue to make progress, all of us have to step up wherever we're situated. And certainly here at the State Controller's Office, we always have tried to do right by issues of equality. But many of you have heard me say in other forums, you know, the reality is in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing and the reckoning that the whole country has been going through, we've had to step back and say, whatever we've done hasn't been enough. And we need to do a whole lot more. And what else can we do? And that is really a struggle and a challenge for me and my team each and every day. But just as a reminder of some of our efforts, we do a lot of different things in our office. One of our big responsibilities is managing the state pension fund. And I'm very pleased that not only is it a well-funded, well-managed plan, but we really have expanded our commitment to providing opportunities for women-owned and minority-owned investment partners. Our Emerging Manager Program, our NWBE program, is really considered among the most ambitious in the nation. In fact, we are now up to over $9 billion in our Emerging Manager Program, and for our total MWBE investments, $27 billion. That's an historic high for us. And it's benefited our bottom line. You know, diversity is a strategic priority for my office, and we include pension fund management in that regard. And the reality is many of our relationships, particularly with the emerging managers, but also with the MWB firms, and I'm very pleased many of the emerging managers graduate into the main part of the portfolio. In fact, they outperform many of our traditional relationships. We just had this week, our 15th annual Emerging Manager MWBE conference. We had over 1,000 participants. So we're really pleased about the success of that and what that's meant, not only to benefit the fund, but to really help investment professionals really grow their business and then do good, giving back to the larger community. We also take very seriously, with regard to the pension fund, our role as a shareholder and the ability to press corporate America on many key issues. Diversity, again, a priority. And when you look at the tone at the top that's set by boards of directors, incredible underrepresentation of both women and minority groups. There was a survey by Institutional Shareholder Services of the 3,000 largest publicly traded companies, and the boards remain overwhelmingly white, even though as we know, in terms of broad definition, minority populations now constitute about 40% of the United States population. Just 12.5% of boards of directors are diverse. Black directors just represent 4% of that number. Black women, just 1.5%. So we need to do much more to have more Black and brown directors on boards. To that end, we've advised our portfolio companies that if they have no racially or ethnically diverse board members, we are going to vote against their slates. And we've done that with regard to gender, and we've seen an increase of women directors, but we need to do more as far as Black and brown directors. So we're serving notice. We also have had a new strategy because we think diversity, equity, inclusion, very important for corporate America to be part of moving that forward. And after the George Floyd murder, so many corporate leaders spoke out in favor of that kind of an agenda. But we need to make sure, in fact, that the companies are following through on that. So, for example, Amazon has become a bigger part of our lives than ever through the COVID environment. But a lot of issues have been raised about how their employees have been treated, particularly their employees of color. We filed a shareholder resolution calling for an independent racial equity audit. And it was voted on last year. We got 44% vote, first time, pretty good vote for first time effort. We're refiling that proposal there at Amazon. And we're also filing a similar proposal for independent racial equity audits at Chipotle, Dollar General, Dollar Tree, and Match Group. So that's going to be a growing area of our involvement. Obviously, we always promote from a procurement contracting point of view, maximizing opportunities for women and minority-owned firms, and we're pleased that we always exceed our goal in that regard. And many of the reports that we've put out, not just during the COVID environment, but even prior to that, really tries to touch on issues that affect the Black community and minority communities generally, whether that's on housing and homeless issues, underreporting of hate crimes been an issue, how students are treated in the school environment, making sure that we adhere to the goals of the Dignity for All Students law that we have in New York State. Those are some examples of some of the issues that we work on. And certainly beyond that, I've certainly tried to lend my voice as an elected official on the big fight that's going on now in terms of jeopardizing the right to vote. I mean, it's really been a frontline battle there. As John Lewis once said, the vote is precious. It is almost sacred. It is the most powerful nonviolent tool we have in a democracy. And we certainly know that we need to do more in that regard. And I know particularly Savante has been working on that issue already with his new position. So I don't want to go on much more because I want to bring in our guests, but this celebration of Black history and remembrance is also a time to really just refocus where we're at. What is the work that we're doing to advance those goals for economic justice, particularly as it impacts the Black community in New York and across America. It is certainly a time of challenge. I mentioned at the outset, leaders that have broken new ground, that are role models, people that we could look to that impact and make change. And so when we've done, as we've done for all the years that I've been doing this, when we honor whatever the month is and whatever the community that we're honoring, part of how we do that is to recognize individuals who contribute significantly and who make a difference and who have great personal stories that I think are worthy of sharing and being acknowledged. So we have two great individuals in that regard, and we'll open it up to conversation in a moment. Let me briefly introduce each of them, though, to you, although I suspect they're familiar to many of you. Jennifer Jones Austin is a fourth-generation leader of faith and social justice. She is currently CEO and Executive Director of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, an organization that's been around for some 100 years. It is an anti-poverty and policy and advocacy organization with 170 member agencies and faith partners. Jennifer has led and secured monumental changes in social policy to strengthen and empower the disenfranchised and the marginalized. Jennifer brings to her work a profound understanding of the link between race, poverty, law, and social policy in America, and also the role that religion plays. Jennifer is a radio host, an author, a public speaker. chairs several influential boards and commissions. She has in the past, and she continues to, including the New York City Racial Justice Commission, the first of its kind in the nation, tasked with targeting and dismantling structural and institutional racism across the city. She's also vice chair of the board of the National Action Network, member of the Myrick Center for Social Justice Advisory Board, the Brain and Behavior Advisory Board at Harvard University, a member of the COVID-19 Roll Up Your Sleeves Task Force created to ensure vaccine information and equitable access in Black and Brown communities. The list goes on. She's a dynamic leader who's committed to equity, inclusion, justice, and opportunity. Jennifer, thank you for joining us. And our other guest, the honorable, still honorable, even though he gave up his formal title, Savante Myrick. Savante was elected to the Ithaca Common Council, the city of Ithaca in upstate New York in 2007 while he was a student at Cornell University. After graduating from Cornell in 2009, Savante ran for mayor of the city of Ithaca and in 2011 and won upon taking office in 2012. At age 24, he became the city's youngest mayor and its first mayor of color, one of the youngest mayors in our entire state, if not the nation. He was reelected in 2015 and reelected in 2019. He had 75% of the vote. I need him to teach me how to do that. Throughout his 10-year tenure, his 3 terms, longer than any of his predecessors, I might add, Cevanti's agenda primarily focused on expanding affordable housing options, confronting homelessness, improving citywide infrastructure. He did this while resolving Ithaca's substantial budget deficit and leading the city's fiscal turnaround. He is known for his smart, inclusive, and responsive leadership, his unwavering commitment to serving people with the highest ethical standards, and for being a resolute progressive voice who's also willing to listen to a broad range of views. Now, disappointing to many in Ithaca, on January 5th of this year, Savante announced his resignation as mayor to embark. Full disclosure, my dream was one day to run on a statewide ticket with Savante Myrick. I wanted to be his lieutenant governor candidate when he ran for governor.
It can still happen.
Maybe it can still happen. I don't know. I think I'll be on my pension by the time that happens. I don't know. But really, I want to thank both of you for giving us time. And I've talked way too much. I want to bring the two of you in. Let's, I'll get to some of your, your respective work with your organizations, but let me just throw out to both of you in the context of how I tried to set up our discussion as part of the Black History Month recognition. Where are we at? I mentioned the challenges everybody's been facing, all the inequalities laid more bare than ever with the COVID experience, the heart-wrenching times post-George Floyd and all the other killings of Black men and women that have been cataloged. We don't have to do that again right now. We're painfully familiar with that. What's your sense as leaders on the front lines? Where are we at? Are we going forward? Are we going backward? Are we standing still? Who wants to start?
I'll begin from my vantage point, and my vantage point being, I guess, in many ways, there are many vantage points that I occupy, that I hold. Talking with people around the nation as a radio talk show host, talking with people here in New York City as the host of a radio program here, and a television program, a co-host. In my work with community-based organizations around New York City, faith leaders across the nation, and also with people around the country, thought leaders, racial equity scholars, everyday persons with lived experience in my work on the Racial Justice Commission. I believe that we are, it may sound cliche to say it, we are at an inflection point. And what I mean by that is, a point where we should be questioning, what does it mean to really move forward with an appreciation for what equity looks like? Does it mean that we just that we try to hold the line on all of these efforts to undo the progress that has been made, or do we deepen Do we, do we essentially double down? Having led the Racial Justice Commission for the last now nearly 11 months, having been in the space as a lawyer and a policy leader and influencer, what I'm appreciating in this moment is that true equity for everybody is not just about more programming. It's not just about more dollars. It's not just about, a policy win here and there. For this nation to truly be equitable, for us to achieve true racial and equity justice, we have to do the structural work. We have to undo these systemic, structural, racist laws that have allowed for institutions and systems to be built that make it difficult for one program or one policy alone, one piece of legislation alone to bring about true equity. So this is an inflection point. Are we willing to dig deep and do the work? And dare I say, I don't believe that we're all there, but a few of us are. And what I learned from the civil rights movement that my father was a very significant contributor to is that you don't necessarily need everybody, but you need a few good men and women and people who are willing to do the work and to speak, truth to power in this moment. So it's an inflection point. And the question for us is, are we going to dig down? Are we going to double down and do the work that is truly necessary in this moment?
Jennifer, are you optimistic right now?
I'm optimistic, frankly, when I have an opportunity to Zoom with you, Comptroller DiNapoli, when I look at the work that you're doing, I'm optimistic because you are looking at these issues structurally. You are looking at not just what government can do with the power it holds, but how do we hold corporations and other sectors accountable? I'm optimistic when I sit here with Savante and all the work that he has done and is poised to do. And I'm optimistic when I think about the fact that there are people who are willing right now to ask of this nation, to ask of this society, these critical questions, to do the critical thinking and the critical analysis. It's hard, but I think back to my ancestors. It was hard for Sojourner Truth. It was hard for Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, and the list goes on and on. But they were committed to the cause. So I'm optimistic.
Okay. Cevante, share us your thoughts about the moment we're in right now.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I will just say that I appreciate the extremely kind introduction and the opportunity to be here with Jennifer, who I've admired from afar for a long time, and with you, Comptroller, whose leadership on issues of racial justice and just across your entire portfolio has just always impressed me, and your friendship has been so kind and so warm. And I think you don't get enough credit for everything you've done, both to move your power as a shareholder, to move these private companies towards justice and equity, but also everything you've done to take care of the fund. The recipients, the people who earned their spot in the fund are disproportionately people of color as a percentage of New York State. And your good stewardship has made sure that those people have secure, comfortable retirements that they were promised, that they worked so hard for many decades for. So I thank you for that. And I think on behalf of my grandmother, who's 94 now, and a retired school librarian, and she and my grandfather, who's a retired music teacher, just passed a couple years ago, they were able to, they were never able to buy the second house in Florida, but when we lost our home, when we were home, and they had enough to buy us some clothes and help fix up their basement so that we could live there until we got back on our feet. So thank you for looking out for all those public employees and for recognizing that itself is an act of racial justice. So knowing where we are, I love Black History Month because I love history and I love Black history. And I love months? No, okay, I don't love months. I love Black history, I love history. I've always, of all the topics in school, history always clicked with me. And I remember my classmates always saying, like, how is this relevant? What does this mean for our lives? And I remember a teacher of mine saying, quoting William Shakespeare, well, the past is prologue, right? Which means if you're going to understand the story that you're living right now, you have to understand the past. And it was like that. That always made intuitive sense to me. And the story I was always told in school is, of course, that Dr. King quote about the arc of justice being long, but the arc of history being long, but bending towards justice. That's why I really love what Jennifer just said. It is too simple and, frankly, too optimistic. We are told that there was a fight for justice. Dr. King gave a speech. A couple other people did some work. But good news, everyone. It's fixed now. Like, we fixed it. And maybe it might seem like, geez, there's bad stuff happening, but it's, everything's okay now. Folks have the right to vote. It's just not true. That's the problem with the story. The problem with the story is it's just not true. I mean, not only was the civil rights movement about more than just one person or a handful of people, it was thousands and thousands of people. And not only was it not just about 1964 or one decade, the civil rights movement is as old as our country is, right? It is a 400-year-long movement for abolition and suffrage and equality and equity. And teaching that story, I think, would give us a better set of lessons. Like what do we call a lesson that comes from a story? You call that a moral. And the moral we need to take from the true story is that we were not saved by one person, and we will not be saved by one person. We all have a responsibility to join that 400-year-long tradition to make sure the train of progress keeps moving. That William Shakespeare quote was updated later by William Faulkner, who said, well, the past isn't dead. In fact, it's not even past. Mm. And so those stories we read about of Bull Connor and George Wallace trying to stop people from voting, Tom, you mentioned the reason I felt I had to join People for the American Way now. I owe such a debt of gratitude to that organization. They were the ones, if you're familiar with the Black church tradition, you've probably heard or been involved with Souls to the Polls, right? Which is a tradition that pastors help move people to vote, not only by inspiring them and making linkages between their real lived conditions and what happens in the halls of government, by actually driving them to the polls. Every Sunday after church during election season, they'll load up vans, et cetera. The founding members of People for the American Way also founded Souls to the Polls. And over the last 5 years, states across this country have introduced and passed legislation that is withering away the Civil Rights Acts, all of the Civil Rights Acts, but particularly the Voting Rights Act. The Supreme Court just brutally undermined it, and each state has been running through those openings, sometimes being so surgical as to close polls where early voting is available, to close those polls at noon on Sunday, the exact moment that most churches let out, right? Now, why would you do that? You would do that because you were trying to stop a certain ethnicity of people from voting. That is, as Jennifer said, an inflection point. That is a moment that should alarm all of us, because I hope that what Dr. King said was true, but I don't know it to be true. Mm-hmm. That the moral arc of the universe bends always towards justice. I don't know that to be true. What I do know is that it bends if we bend it. That it can be fixed as it was fixed before if we lean in this moment. So I'm really excited about the work that's being done in all 50 states to combat this wave of voter suppression. I'm really alarmed by the stance that one political party is taking towards voters and ensuring the right to vote for everyone. But I think that this is a fight we can win so long as we all commit to fighting it.
Well, Savante, you're certainly going to be on the front line of that fight, and I know that's what motivated you to take on this national challenge after such a successful tenure as mayor of Ithaca. I want to stick with you just for a second, and then I have something specific for Jennifer. But you know, you touched on. I mean, you certainly were not born with a silver spoon in your mouth, or given an easy path to get to where you are. You know, homelessness, as you touched on, going to school at Cornell, deciding to run. Being elected at 24, and of course, some folks start at age 18, but that's a separate conversation. I won't get into that, but 24 is still pretty good. And running as not only a young person, but a Black male. And running in a city that last time I looked is not an overwhelmingly Black city. It's a white city. So, you know, that history, and I was a history major in school, so I relate to your comments, but you know, you are part of our state's history, right? With what you've achieved. I'm not saying that to flatter you. I'm saying because that's a fact. It's a reality, right? So that experience of being a young Black man coming out of a disadvantaged background, appealing to a white community to vote for you. I'm sure you've had time to reflect on that. Share your thoughts about that and the challenge of getting in and the challenge then of governing.
Yeah. Well, I think it is part of why I'm a natural optimist. You know, there's certainly, if you want to build an optimist, just make sure every year of his life is better than the year that came before it. And that was certainly the case for me. It just, you know, I thought, gosh, it certainly beats the other way around. If you know what I mean? If you're born with a silver spoon and then you struggle, I think it can be hard to make sense of the world. I think it also gives me such great confidence that I had people who broke down barriers for me, from Tom, you yourself getting elected at 18, that helps assure people that they're like, am I about to do a crazy thing by voting for this 24-year-old? I think Senator Schumer was elected 22 or somewhere around there. Then Senator Barack Obama. When I was running for the city council, people were like, oh yeah, this guy is kind of like that senator over in Illinois. We like him. Those kind of barriers open up doors, but it's not just, and this is what I think it's really important for folks, especially in my position, to remember, it's not just about folks who are going to run for office, who be the first CEO of this or that. If we can promote equity, maybe the best way to answer this is with a quick story about this kid who was 15 years old, Black kid, who was coming to see his mom in City Hall. And this is my first year in office, so I was still young then. And he gets in the elevator, and a woman gets in the elevator with him, older white woman gets in the elevator with him, looks at him and goes, hey, are you that new mayor? And so he told his mom was telling me the story. I'm like, hey, I don't look 15. And she goes, no, you don't understand. He's been mistaken for a lot of things before, right? He's had people get off the elevator when he got on it because they were afraid of him, 15 years old. He's had people follow him around the stores thinking that he was going to shoplift, but he hadn't been mistaken for a figure of authority before. And that he came into her office beaming.
Wow.
And she hoped that experience was going to stay with him through his first job interview, or when he filled out his college application. So when he asked somebody to go to prom with him. That is what's so important. I mean, diversity in our organizations makes our organization stronger. It makes them achieve better. This is true in finance. It's true in government. It's true in athletics. It's true in all walks of life. But having diversity also changes the self-perception. And that is a really, really important and I think underrated part of our work to promote racial equity and justice.
That's a powerful story and a powerful statement. Jennifer, we're also coming up on Women's History Month coming up very shortly. So, you know, I asked Cevanti in terms of perspective of being a Black man in a majority white community and getting people to vote for him. And I mentioned at the outset the underrepresentation of Blacks on corporate boards, particularly Black women. Mm-hmm. So what's your perspective as a Black woman with all the different activities you've been involved in? What are the obstacles, the challenges that either you personally have had to deal with and overcome, or that you've observed in terms of your colleagues and peers from a Black woman perspective?
Well, we began by you sharing that we didn't have enough time to list the names of all Black leaders that have come before us and done great things. We don't have enough time for me to even begin to touch upon what I have experienced as a Black woman in leadership and the challenges that are before us at every turn. You know, someone once asked me, it was when Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were candidating for the Democratic nomination for president, you know, who identified with more? Did I identify more with Barack Obama or with Hillary Clinton? And my response was, you know, I can't choose one, because at all times in America, I am both Black and I am woman. I remember an incident when Savante began talking about the elevator experience. Years ago, when I served as Deputy Commissioner for the New York City Administration for Children's Services, the administration had just moved to a new building in Lower Manhattan, and the executive floor was at the top of the building. There was one floor that sat on top of it, which was a floor that was occupied by a private law firm. There was an elevator, the executive elevator, that the deputy commissioners and the commissioner of ACS were allowed to take. And that elevator went only to the 18th floor and the 19th floor where the law office was located. I, along with deputy commissioners, fellow deputy commissioners, and the commissioner, really took that elevator because we wanted to be with others. We were comfortable with that and wanted to be with other people. But from time to time, you know, running late for a meeting, you know, we jump on that elevator because it was express. If I got on that elevator once, I got on the elevator, you know, maybe 10 times and had the experience of people going to the law firm telling me that I was on the wrong elevator, right? But if I got on that, if I came on by myself, but if I got on with a colleague who was white and male or female, or Black and male, I was tagging along with them. Perhaps I was an administrative assistant, or maybe I was a lower level manager, but I could not be an executive with the Administration for Children's Services. That's the type of microaggression that being Black and woman as a leader, we experience on a daily. I went to law school, went to grad school and studied management and policy. And still today, being in my profession and serving for better now nearing 30 years, I had people look across the table at me and say, wow, I didn't know you were so analytical. Oh, I didn't know that you'd want to be involved in the substantive conversations. And I can't help but think time and time again, it has everything to do with my being Black and woman. I try not to, but I have to always kind of run things through that filter and then move beyond it. And what I always draw inspiration from are the women who've gone before me. Women who, like Shirley Chisholm, who I will just happen to say my experience was a little different. I grew up living 2 doors down from Shirley Chisholm.
Oh, wow.
I grew up with the civil rights leaders of the 60s and 70s at my dinner table and 80s at my dinner table. So I grew up in a household where being Black was indisputable. If this is who you were and you showed up Black, you know, and no matter the color of your skin, no matter how light or dark complexion you were, Black is Black is Black is Black. But I grew up with this sense of Black power because who I was surrounded by. And so during Black History Month and at other times of the year, I draw inspiration from Black leaders like Shirley Chisholm, who said, if they don't want to give you a seat at the table, you know, bring a folding chair. Persons like Anna Julia Cooper, who was the first Black woman to earn a PhD in education, who said, only the Black woman can say in the quiet, undisputed dignity of my womanhood without suing or special patronage, then and there I enter, the whole race enters with me. She was talking about the struggles of being Black and woman and how whenever you show up, you're bringing the experience of all of society, the marginalization, the oppression, because of your race and because of your sex. And so you come with your whole being. So what I choose to do as Black and woman is not really kind of sit back and say, woe is me, but lean into my ancestors. And I use Black History Month as a time to refuel, to reflect on those women. Women like Anna Julia Cooper, Shirley Chisholm, Maya Angelou, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Dorothy Height, all of them. And when I am discouraged because, or would be discouraged because people want to look at me still today and marginalize me, belittle me, demean me, I just draw on that strength and I carry forward, knowing that I'm here in this moment because I have purpose and I have to serve.
That's beautifully said, beautifully said. Jennifer, let's stick with you and the work that the Federation's doing. We're all painfully aware of how difficult the past 2 years have been and how through the pandemic, both in terms of healthcare outcomes, economic outcomes, how the inequities that have always been there have just gotten worse for many communities. Mm-hmm. And I know you recently put out your report that we had talked about a few months ago, Push to the Precipice, how benefit cliffs and financial gaps undermine the safety net of New Yorkers. And really looking at that question, particularly as we hopefully are getting towards a post-pandemic environment, some of those emergency benefits that were put in place, we could debate whether they were adequate or not, but even the ones that were put in place will start to not be there. How do we get the kind of conversation we need to have about people who have been in the shadows and maybe some came out of it a little bit, but very likely to perhaps be going back into those shadows again, and the work of that report, but all the other advocacy work of the Federation is so key to this discussion. Why don't you take a few moments to share thoughts on that?
So first, I want to, like Savante, just commend you and express my appreciation for all that you've done. The work of, first and foremost, going back to the Great Recession, when you recognized how nonprofits had been most challenged and still today are challenged, and you leaned in there. The work that you're doing as a shareholder with corporations, holding them accountable, because it's not just a government responsibility to be equitable towards all persons. It's a corporate responsibility. It's a societal responsibility. At FPWA, what we're centering on is the structural underpinnings. As I said early on, we can try to policy our way out of this, legislate our way out of this, but when we don't appreciate and lean in and take stock of the fact that structurally as a society, we have set up this system such that people, low-income people, and especially women of color, will always be disadvantaged. When we structurally allow for pay inequity and for wage segregation and occupation, wage deprivation and occupation segregation, and demean and devalue the work that that women of color do because they've been denied other opportunities. When we don't center on that, we're just going to be in this perpetual state of finding them, in places and spaces where they cannot get ahead, despite whatever resources are made available by the government to them. So right now, one of the things that I'm centering on, it's something, and I'm speaking to you right now as an individual, as a citizen, and as a leader of FPWA, not in my New York City, my official role as a commission of the New York City Racial Justice Commission, but I am talking about one of the proposals put forth as part of the commission's work. We're pushing for and advancing in the commission's work a ballot measure, it's on the ballot for New York City, to establish a true cost of living measurement in New York City. Currently, the federal poverty level, we all know, is dated and antiquated. And it says that a family of 3 living anywhere in the country earning $21,800 technically is not poor. We use that federal poverty level to essentially, sustain a federal poverty minimum wage that is woefully inadequate, $7.25, annualized at $15,000. Who can live on that anywhere in the nation? But we use that to essentially allow for the suppression of wages. We also use it to allow for, discounting who's in need of critical income supports. So we need to look at the true cost of living as the real measurement. In New York City, it's been found. In other parts of our state, it's been found. and counties all across the state that a working mother with 2 young children in New York City needs about $95,000 to make ends meet. In other parts of the state, $80,000. But the federal poverty level would say that if she's making $45,000, she doesn't qualify for child care subsidies. So the work we're doing right now is calling the question. One of my, one of the Black women leaders, ancestral leaders that I hold dear was Ida B. Wells, who was an investigative journalist who, went around the country and exposed the lynchings of Black men in the South for what they were. It was suggested that they were committing crimes. What was really intended was to try to use lynching as a form of putting Black persons into having them submit and be hesitant to really, call out the questions, being hesitant to vote. So I am essentially calling on her, my ancestral leader, to speak truth to power and say this nation needs to stop discounting what it costs to live in this nation, especially for women of color, who largely are the primary heads of households. That's the type of work that I'm leaning into right now.
Wow. And we want to collaborate with you on figuring out how we could add voice and add support to calling the question, as you point out. Savante, you're on a big platform now, right? A national organization. And if I read my history right on People of the American Way, Barbara Jordan was one of the founders of it, right?
Yes, that's right.
Early 80s. And never forget her strength, we could use another Barbara Jordan today. We've got some in Congress, but we could use her voice as well. But my experience, so I'll say this for me, and people could be free to say, Tom, you're wrong. You're having a wrong impression. With many of the political advocacy organizations that are out there, my experience tends to be they tend to be white or Black or maybe Hispanic. It's not often that it's multiracial. And, even in New York, again, I could be called out for being wrong about this, but I know back in the 80s with the folks who were involved, and they were folks in my community that were very active with People for the American Way. They were all white. Now, obviously, Ben Jealous is the president, right? You're the executive director. But from a national perspective, is that one of your challenges, to make your organization truly a multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition? Because if we want to achieve the changes you alluded to earlier, and a lot of things we probably haven't touched on, isn't that what we need to do? And we don't do a good enough job of going across the color line in terms of collaboration.
Absolutely. I think you put your finger right on it. We just haven't built enough. We haven't made clear what is the realist lesson of history, which is the greatest advancements for human rights and human justice happen as part of big coalitions. And I think this is where we make a mistake by not, again, telling this story of, so I remember when my class learned about slavery. This is an experience that a lot of Black folks remember, because we grew up with it, right? And then there's a moment in 3rd grade, 4th grade, and the teacher is explaining what's happening, and some of your white classmates are just shocked and aghast, and it can be uncomfortable. All the heads turning to look at the Black kids, and you're like, don't look at me, look at the teacher. I'll never forget that first day, this little girl who stood up and just very bravely said, well, if I was around, I would not be one of the slave owners, and I would not be tolerating it. And I love my Black classmates, and I would protect them. And there were so many white folks who felt the same, and who put their bodies on the line, who fought their entire lives for justice. And that coalition is really important for our success. You know, People for the American Way, as you mentioned, Barbara Jordan, one of the co-founders, the other co-founder, still a member of the board, is Norman Lear. He's 99 years old now. But doesn't seem a day over 30 somehow, still has a ton of energy. Dolores Huerta on the board, Reg Weaver, Reverend Tim McDonald. It is, as an organization, and now with the hiring of Ben Jealous as our president, bringing me on as executive director, our direction is very clear. We have to build a multiracial and working class coalition across the country that is going to protect the rights of the people who are most vulnerable. So whether it is Asian Americans in New York City or elsewhere that are facing an alarming rise in violent crime and hate crimes, whether it is Jewish Americans who are under assaults, whether they're worshiping in their synagogue in Pennsylvania, or whether it is Black Americans being denied the right to vote all across the I-20 corridor in the South. We have to work together and stand together and say that the question is not, are you white or are you Black? If you're white, then you are not on our side. If you are Black, then you are not on our side. The question is, who would you have been? What would you have done in 1964? What would you have done in 1865? Who would you have been then? And who would you like to be now? Are you going to be on the side of justice? Are you going to be on the side of fairness? Are you going to be on the side of freedom? Mm-hmm. If so, then you are us and we are you. We are together, people for the American way. But if you are not committed to freedom, if you're not committed to fairness, if you're not committed to justice, then regardless of your ethnicity, well, we want to reach you if we can. And if we can't, we want to beat you each November.
If I can just join in here, yeah, and just say, I feel like I'm going way back. I don't know. I'm not that old, but I'm like, why do I want to say right on? But just lean also into Cevante's, helping us to appreciate the importance of education in this moment. And I'm going to tie it into what I've been saying about structural racism. It is by design that communities are pitted one against the other. That, poor persons, whether they be white or Black, or of Hispanic origin or other, are not often working collectively, because by design, the system was set up to pit them one against another. Racism, very often people think of it as an end in of itself. No, it's a tool. It's a tool that has been used to perpetuate the system of inequity. And so what we have to help people, no matter their backgrounds, racially, ethnically speaking, nationally speaking, we have to help people to understand we're all in this boat together, and that it is the intention of structural systemic racism to keep us at odds. Keep in mind, the Black Panther movement. Keep in mind, Fred Hampton became most dangerous to the white supremacist structure when he leaned in and appreciated, if we bring all people who are suffering together, then we've got an opportunity to do some good here. Martin Luther King Jr., after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, when he established the Poor People's Campaign, that's when he began bringing all people together, because he realized that's, that the collective voice being unified, seeing our commonalities in our suffering, it is what is going to advance this cause.
It's a challenge, though, because I mean, I know we only have a few minutes left, but the whole issue of class. I mean, this, if you're poor, whether you're white or Black or what, I mean, and yet we see, particularly for people who are poor, very often that's the conflict, right? Some of the anger that you're seeing from white folks these days are from poorer folks who should have more in common with Black folks that are struggling as well, but just the divisions seem to be there. And you overlay that with social media and the fact that, I mean, we talk about this in the context of other issues. We have no common place to get information anymore. We're not dealing with the same set of facts anymore. Everybody tunes into their, news show that kind of says what you believe already, or you go on to your, the social media account of the web page of something that's reinforcing what is very often a poorly formed judgment to begin with. I mean, how do we begin to cut through on these big issues we've been talking about when there's so much noise out there? That some of it deliberate, Jennifer, I agree with you, and some of it just because, especially during COVID, all this craziness has been unleashed. And you look at the national political discourse. I mean, we had challenges in the 60s, certainly. But you compare it to what the challenges are now, the divisions now, it's like, there are times I sit there, I was asking two of you if you're optimistic. I mean, I'm at wit's end sometimes about being optimistic. I mean, what we've been talking about for the past, these are big issues that we can do a better job on, but we get distracted and sidetracked. And anyway.
Well, I completely agree with it. And I was just sitting, as you were talking about that, Tom, that Jennifer's point about this multiracial working class coalition being where the real power is true. So when I grew up, we were broke. We couldn't even afford to pay attention, as we said. And my very best friend was just as broke. Steve and I would go to the food pantry together to eat. We started our first business together, a window washing company, Savante and Steve's. It was a S&S window washers. We won't be a pain in your glass. Yeah, pretty good, right? So, yes. And we would go around together and we would charge 25 cents a pane and we wash his windows. And through high school, we helped each other. And at no point did he view me or my success as a threat to him or his social status. And at no point did I view him or his family as part of the oppressors, right? These are the folks that are keeping me down. We recognized that we were struggling in a system that was unfair, but we recognized that we're struggling together. He joined the Navy. I went off to school. His social media feed would get, before, this is the power of these algorithms, bombarded with Alex Jones and Breitbart and right-wing stuff, because they're looking at, okay, this is his demographic. Young man, mid-20s, Navy, we're going to feed him this information because this is what seems to get the most engagement out of that demographic. And it pulls us out of the real reality and into this separate reality. I was communicating, Tom, with your staff as we were trying to set this up, and it was tough for them to reach me because I was taking a train trip across the country. Something I always wanted to do as a sort of a bucket list thing. And my week after office, I spent on Amtrak, which I recommend to everybody, and going through the Rockies. Anyway, one thing I learned is that this amazing technology, the trains, are the reason we know what time it is, right? Before trains, and this blew my mind, before the trains connected the entire country, every city had its own local time. Every town had its own local time. And they would be close, right? If it was 9:15 in San Francisco, it might be 9 in Los Angeles. But there was no way to actually know, and little reason to care, what time it was, because by the time you rode your horse from San Francisco to Los Angeles, you would just think your watch was 15 minutes off when you looked up at the clock tower and saw that it was 9:15 here. Well, the trains, they had to figure out a standardized time because people had to know what time to get on the train, what time the train was coming, and the trains had to have a standardized time so that they didn't hit each other on the rails. So they both lobbied and anyway, we now all agree on what time it is. That's what technology could do. What technology is doing right now is it's making it so no one knows what time it is, right? No one knows what the real truth is because we're all living in these separate bubbles. I think the answer, of course, so I remain optimistic, Tom, but I think the answer is that we have to use technology more and better and not less. And we can't cede this ground to the worst actors. So by part of People for the American Way, we started up a program called Defend the Black Vote. And in 2020, we sent out over 10 million texts specifically to Black male voters who were in states that were having their voting rights eroded away. So places where polling places have been closed, hours to vote had been shortened, and folks who were targets of misinformation online and via text. And we were getting thousands and thousands of replies from people who were saying, well, I got a text saying that because of COVID, voting had been extended till Thursday. So can I go vote on Thursday? Right? And that's why we're in there to say, no, that's, again, technology trying to confuse us about what time it is. We were in there to say, no, you've got to vote by Tuesday. Folks saying, I went to the polling place, I voted every election for the last 20 years, it's closed. Can you tell me where to go? And we'd go and look up online and tell them where to vote. Folks who are saying, I got this ballot, does this look right to you? They'd send us pictures. So what I think we have to do is use, it has become a more confusing time. And I certainly, the last 3 years I was in office, really in the Trump era, the politics got more vicious. Social media made things more personal. The conversation seemed to erode. But the way to solve that is not by pulling back. We've got to fill up the space with good stuff. Wow, I keep saying wow every time one of you says something, so people can think I don't have a good vocabulary. But you know, I've got to wrap it up in a few minutes. But just, you know, Savante, let me just say to you, you know, we know each other a long time, and you know, I'm a big fan and consider you a great friend. You have such an incredible story, and you know, I hate to use the overused phrase sometimes, being a role model, but I mean, you really are, and especially given where I came from, how I started, you know, whatever you can do, you know, to mentor young people, especially young Black people, especially young Black men, to see public service, running for office as a pathway that makes sense. And given where you came from, and obviously where you're going, I just think there's so much that you can do to help others be willing to fill the leadership roles that have to be filled out there. And so I want you, you know, since you don't have to, you know, answer 24/7, right? When someone has a problem, you got to write a book, because you got so many great stories already. I'm serious. I mean, everybody tells me to write a book and I never take the time to do it, but you have so much to share now before you're 80 years old. You got to do something now. And I want Jennifer to be your inspiration for it, because she wrote a book, and I love the title, Consider It Pure Joy, Consider Pure Joy. And I want Jennifer to talk about that. And what I feel bad, we're running out of time, because each of you had some personal challenges that you went through, right? Savante, you had your low points, right? And you worked through it. Jennifer, you had an issue with confronting illness, right? You worked through it. Probably don't have time to get into that. We'll have to have another conversation with the two of you. But Jennifer, as part of reinforcing my charge to Savante that he takes some time to write and to share, at least some essays, if not a whole book. Tell us a little bit about Consider It Pure Joy, because I just love the title to begin with.
I'm going to try to do this very quickly, and I echo our controller. You've got to write a book. It is, you know, people say, who reads books anymore? People do read books about, and people will read the stories of people's lived experiences that they can relate to. Consider Pure Joy is a chronicling of my sudden and horrific journey with leukemia. I woke up on a Friday morning with a flu-like fever back in 2009. And by that next Friday, I lay in a hospital bed, comatose, intubated, with the doctors telling my husband that I was going to die within 48 hours. I survived the illness after receiving chemotherapy, a cocktail of chemotherapy, only to learn that I had a broken chromosome, an environmentally caused cancer with a broken chromosome that had rendered my bone and blood-making system defunct. The doctor said that it was environmentally caused, and at this point of fact, I was in 9/11 and walked through 9/11 with my 3-year-old child and pregnant, 6 months pregnant, and prayed to God that whatever I was taking in, as a pregnant woman and as my daughter was taking in, that it was to affect any of us, it would affect me only. Who knows? But anyway, doctors told me that I'd survive the weekend, but would likely die if I didn't receive a bone marrow transplant. And so in the book, I chronicled the journey of essentially being told that I was likely going to die, not being able to find a match. I needed someone of similar genetic typing, full three siblings, full-blooded, same mom, same dad, should have been matches, were not. Turned to a bone marrow registry with 8 million people in it. None of them were a match for me. My husband then launched a nationwide search and brought a record number, unprecedented number of people to the registry to be a donor for me. And what we learned as people were joining the registry was that other people in need of bone marrow transplants were getting matches from people who joined to be a match for me. But we didn't find a match for me through that process. But what I did learn was about community taking care of community. And it strengthened my work on the other side of surviving cancer. I ultimately got a cord blood transplant, and it's just an amazing story of how I began my work and my journey in this career, working to support and help protect vulnerable children, and how when I needed someone to save and protect me, didn't get it through a traditional bone marrow, but got it through a stem cell transplant using the stem cells found in the cord blood of 2 African-American babies. Wow. So it's about this journey that I was on, that at every turn, just fraught with challenges, but how I was able to grow and my family and my community grow in the process, and in turn come out on the other side and find purpose in continuing this journey to be a voice for, to give back, to support community. And I tell you, I've been on a book tour now for 4.5 years, and the story doesn't get old because people can relate. People need to see persons like you, Savante, who, wasn't born with a silver spoon in your mouth, but used your experiences and your journey, not just to better yourself, but to better, those around you, and to be a voice for the voiceless. And they could be inspired by it. So I'm here to be that, that if you want like that person who's going to read for you, proofread, and be that editor to lean in, I'm here to do it with you. There's a place and a space for persons like you to share your story, because others can be so greatly impacted by it.
Jennifer, that's incredible, and he'll listen to you. He doesn't listen to me, so I'm glad. I've got to wrap it up. I got 2 things I still have to do in addition to thanking both of you. It's obviously been a great conversation. So, first, getting back to a little bit of controller responsibility. We do a lot of important work. We do one thing that's a lot of fun, and that's returning people's lost money with our Office of Unclaimed Funds. I always put in a pitch for it because we're holding accounts valued at $17 billion. And especially these days, we shouldn't be holding your money. You should be getting it back. So these are often old bank accounts that went dormant. People sometimes move, don't keep up their contact information. Could have been a check, like a health insurance check that never got cashed. Different ways you can be separated from money. And I always say to folks, go to our Office of State Controller website. You can search right online. And if there's a match, get the money back very quickly. Or during business hours, you can call the 800 number, 1-800-221-9311. But Cevanti, I know you've been very busy, so you can't always keep track of your accounts. But so we found for you $136 for
You're kidding.
Myrick. So you can go out and buy some, a pen and a tablet, so you can start writing that book. But we'll get the paperwork to return the money. So we use you as a prop to say to all our audience, yes, there is real money there for real people, and check it out, and put in not just your name, but organization names that you're involved with. And, so Savante, we would have gotten you this money even if you didn't do the conversation with us. But I'm glad to be able to embarrass you in front of everybody.
That is great. Thank you very much. What a great service. This is very nice.
That was great. Nice. I mean, you'd be surprised how many folks that we run into that, hey, I didn't know I had money in there, and a lot of folks do. Let me do this as we close out. I want to, just for our audience, we have, of course, what would it be without a proclamation from the Controller's Office for each of you. And I will take a moment to read them. They're not that long. First, for you, Jennifer, whereas the Office of State Controller is hosting its annual celebration of Black History Month and honoring Jennifer Jones Austin, CEO of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, an anti-poverty nonprofit with 170 member organizations in Greater New York that promotes economic opportunity and upward mobility. And whereas a Brooklyn native and a graduate of Rutgers, Fordham, and NYU, Jennifer Jones Austin has gained extensive experience in the nonprofit sector in New York City government, advancing civil rights, improving services, and dismantling systemic inequities. And in 2012, she joined Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, where she advocates for robust and responsive public policies and builds nonprofit capacity, as well as co-sponsoring the city's police reform initiative and chairing the Racial Justice Commission. And whereas in addition, Jennifer Jones Austin is a radio host and author, a member of the COVID-19 task force working to improve vaccine access and education in Black and Brown communities, and a member of numerous boards, including serving as vice chair of the National Action Network, and social justice activists, residents, and stakeholders appreciate her creative leadership and her tireless devotion to justice. Now let it be proclaimed that State Controller, yours truly, does hereby congratulate and applaud Jennifer Jones Austin for her outstanding service. And further, on this 18th day of February 2022, Controller DiNapoli does join with the people of New York in thanking Jennifer Jones Austin and wishing her happiness and success. We're gonna get this shipped to you, Jennifer, okay?
Oh, I'm so honored, so humbled.
Well,
thank you, tremendous. Coming from you, this is a big deal.
Hardly.
Thank you.
And our second proclamation for Savante, whereas the Office of the New York State Controller is celebrating Black History Month and recognizing the Honorable Savante Myrick, the Executive Director of People for the American Way, an advocacy organization committed to building a democratic society that fully realizes cherished ideals of freedom, equality, opportunity, and justice for all. And whereas raised in Earlville in upstate New York, Savante Myrick experienced homelessness and relied on public services as a child, shaping his understanding of the importance of effective government. And he entered public service while still a student at Cornell University, serving on the Ithaca Common Council. And after graduating, he was elected mayor of Ithaca, becoming the city's youngest mayor and first mayor of color. And whereas in office, Savante Myrick stabilized the city's finances, reorganized government, improved services, lowered taxes, protected refugees, promoted sustainability, developed an innovative public health approach to fighting addiction, and invested in public space and equitable economic development. And he won re-election twice to joining People for the American Way in early 2022, where his priorities include protecting the right to vote and advancing democracy reforms. Now let it be proclaimed that yours truly does hereby congratulate and applaud the Honorable Savante L. Myrick for his outstanding service. Be it further proclaimed on this 18th day of February 2022, Controller DiNapoli does join with the people of New York in thanking Savante Myrick and wishing him happiness and success. So we got one for you too, Savante. Let me just say as we close it out that it's been a great conversation. I feel we just touched on the topics, and I know there are a few others that my staff wanted me to ask, but I just think it's so important when we do these kinds of events. And it's interesting because of the COVID environment, we've been doing less of the we have been doing in-person events particularly, but we normally do an in-person event, celebrate whatever the ethnic or racial group is that's being honored in a particular month, and then recognize some leaders and have them say a couple of words. Last year for Black History, we had a conversation with Hazel Dukes. And believe me, with Hazel, I didn't have to say anything. She just took the whole thing over, which is beautiful. Great. And I just saw her this week, and she's going to be 90 next month. She's incredible.
She's amazing.
But this was a great conversation. And to have the two of you interact also and share your respective thoughts, I thoroughly enjoyed being a bystander, and I just apologized if I spoke more than I should have, because I should have just sat back and let the two of you go at it. But when we talk about Black history and we mention some of the leaders of the past, you two are leaders of today. And I agree what Cevanti said about history totally, but I think we also need to take the time to recognize the leaders who are making history today. And each of you in your respective ways, you are doing that. And you both have powerful stories. And you both really are people that just make me proud to know you, proud that you're both New Yorkers, and you've given us a very special way to celebrate Black History Month. And I really want to thank both of you. And and we will continue the conversation. I think that's it. I'm going to say thanks. Great appreciation to the two of you, and thanks to everyone who tuned in.
You've been wonderful. This has been a blessing.
Truly. Thank you, Tom.